When I started this YouTube channel, I just thought it was going to be some worship songs and some short sermons. But shortly after I posted my first short sermon, I had some youth group kids asking me to tell some of the stories that they heard growing up. So I guess I'm going to have to start a stories segment. This first story is about an old friend of mine named Brandon, somebody that I worked with for a while. And this is Brandon's story of when he was a late teenager, 16, 17, 18 years old, and his parents were getting divorced. His dad was an atheist, and his mom was a Catholic. And Brandon hadn't really made up his mind yet. He wasn't really sure which one it was. He knew that there was something. He wasn't convinced that his dad was right. He knew that there was something, but he wasn't sure that his mom was right because he didn't know what the something was. So he had heard his dad before, and he had taken into consideration his opinion, and he had never really taken his mom into consideration. So Brandon decided to walk to the place that he worked at, a restaurant that he worked at in Chicago, and he brought a Bible with him. He didn't know anything about the Bible. He hadn't read it before, maybe little bits and pieces about what his mom had said about it, but never really dove into it himself. So Brandon started to walk to the place that he worked at, the restaurant, not too far away from his house. It was February, and if you're not from Chicago, if there's one word that we would use to describe February in downtown Chicago, it would be cold. That's really the only word that we would use to describe Chicago in February, cold. So Brandon was walking in the cold to work, and he got to work, and he worked at a restaurant, and the restaurant was designed like, it was kind of like a long hallway sort of a deal with little like things on the sides where people could sit, but the break table was all the way in the back of the hallway, back of the restaurant, and it was like a little booth, a two-seater booth. But when you're walking up to the booth, it was kind of like this, where you'd be able to see both seats, and the table was sticking out at you. So Brandon walks up to the end of the hallway, and he sits down in the booth where they take breaks at, and he said he remembers ordering a hot tea. So as he's waiting for the hot tea to come, he decides, okay, if there is something, then I need to find it. So he opens up his Bible to Genesis, the first chapter, first page of the Bible, and he starts to read. Anybody who's been a Christian for longer than 5 minutes knows you probably shouldn't start in Genesis if you don't know anything about the Bible. We tell you usually to start in Matthew, because that's where you get to hear the stories of Jesus. So Brandon starts in Genesis, and after the story of creation, he starts to get discouraged a little bit on what does this all mean? Who are all these people I've never heard of? Why are all these genealogies coming up? He was really confused. So as his tea comes and he tries to push through reading a little bit more, his nose starts to run. And anybody who's from Chicago knows when you are outside in the cold for a little while and you come into the warm, and especially add the hot tea, everybody's nose is going to run when you're looking down reading something. So Brandon notices that he keeps doing this with his nose, and he's getting aggravated at it. So he closes the Bible in frustration, and he says, not out loud, he says, if you're real and you will give me what I need a Kleenex. And he just kind of waits for a minute, and he sits in the request that he made, and he kind of feels a little bit embarrassed, and he kind of laughs at himself and shakes his head, and he apologizes and says he's not a magician. If he was real, he wouldn't just make Kleenex appear. That's ridiculous. So he apologizes, kind of like a guilty conscience, sort of a sorry that I asked for that. Maybe I should just go back to the Bible. So he opens it again in a different area and starts reading, but he still can't understand what's happening. So he finishes his tea, gets frustrated, and he decides that maybe he should talk to somebody else who knows something more about it. So he closes the Bible, and he goes to get out of the booth. And when he gets out of the booth, he kicks something. And he looks down, and this is what he kicked. Now, the way Brandon says it, when he walked up to the booth, he could see everything. He could see the floor beneath the table. He did not see this. He said he knows God is not a God that makes Kleenex appear right before your very eyes. He's not out to prove himself to us. But whether it appeared at his feet or whether it was there the whole time, the truth is that Brandon didn't see it. Brandon didn't kick it as he was sitting there moving around. Brandon had no idea it was there when his nose was running. And Brandon prayed specifically for Kleenex. And just by chance, as Brandon was getting out of his seat, he kicked the Kleenex that he hadn't kicked the entire time he was there. So you can make of that what you want, but I know who it was. Hey, this channel is not for my glory. It's not for my popularity. It's for his glory. So if you like what you hear or the songs or something resonates with you, if you could please like it and subscribe, I'd appreciate it and kind of get the word out, because the more people that hear the message, the better. Thanks. Check you later.